It's the late 1960s, and we're on the island of Sicily in southern Italy. Magistrate Cesare Terranova has travelled to a prison in the capital, Palermo, to interview an inmate named Luciano Leggio. This prisoner is a member of the Cosa Nostra, otherwise known as the Sicilian Mafia. Terranova sits down and starts with a simple question. What's your name? Luciano Leggio just sits there. Nothing. Silence. He seems annoyed to even be there. But Judge Terranova perseveres with the questions, because Luciano Leggio isn't just any old member of the Mafia, he's the head of a crime family in Sicily. In fact, he's the boss of one of the most powerful of all the clans, the Corleonesi, named after the Sicilian town of Corleone. And if the name Corleone sounds familiar, it's because it's also the name given to the American Mafia family in the Godfather movies. So Judge Terranova sits there trying to get Luciano Leggio to say something, anything, that might help him with the big case he's preparing against the Sicilian Mafia. The biggest stumbling block in cases like these has always been getting people to talk. Because everyone knows that the Mafia will kill you for even thinking of being an informant. Silence is the power behind these self-described men of honor. But Magistrate Cesare Terranova keeps going with his questions. What's your mother's name? What's your father's name? Hardly controversial topics, you'd think. And Leggio keeps saying he can't recall. Then, in frustration, Judge Terranova asks a legal clerk to write down that Leggio does not know whose son he is. Now, this might not sound like such a terrible thing to say to a Cosa Nostra Mafia boss, but we're talking about 1960s Sicily, deeply Catholic, steeped in a male-dominated culture of honor. And this magistrate has dared imply that Luciano Leggio might be a bastard. Really, Terranova probably should have known better. He's also a born and bred Sicilian and knows that small slights like this one can cut very deeply. Looking back on this moment, the judge later says this: Leggio actually had foam on his lips. He would have killed me on the spot if he could. It's a slight that will not be forgotten. Years later, Cesare Terranova's wife would reveal that not long before his death, her husband told her, "Don't worry. They don't dare touch judges. They won't touch me." But they would. And they did. Hello, my friend. I'm Aslan Pahari, and this is Assassins, the show where we tell the stories of the world's most shocking assassinations. Today, Cesare Terranova, the first Italian magistrate to expose the inner workings of the Sicilian Mafia. You had to be smart, brave, and tireless to take on the Cosa Nostra in Italy, and Terranova was all three. Not a job for the faint-hearted, and not one with a high survival rate. The word mafiosi likely comes from the Sicilian word mafioso, which means swagger or boldness or bravado. The term existed long before the modern association with organized crime in southern Italy. Sitting right at the bottom of Italy and strategically located in the Mediterranean Sea, Sicily is one of the most conquered islands in the world. The Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Vandals, the Byzantines, the Saracens, the Normans, and the Allies in World War II all took over at some point. And with each new invader, Sicilian mistrust of centralized government grew. Over time, a separate, parallel system of local power emerged. Mafiosi were often hired by landowners to provide protection, but they'd also provide things the community needed, help settle local disputes, and oversee a sometimes violent system of justice. By the 19th century, the mafiosi had become more like private armies. It was only in the 1860s that police first used the word mafia to refer to criminal conspiracies in the south of Italy. In other words, This mafiosi power operated long before the word mafia came into existence. The Italian name for the Sicilian mafia, the Cosa Nostra, actually means our thing. It was our thing against the waves of foreign powers taking over the island. Cesare Terranova's campaign against the mafia begins in the late 1950s in Palermo, Sicily. Now in his late 30s, Terranova has just been made head of the examining office at the Palermo court. It's his first serious job as a magistrate, and it's not going to be easy. Murders, bombings, cases involving organised crime quickly pile up on his desk. And that's not to mention the mafia's most lucrative business of all, trafficking heroin into North America. Back then, magistrates like Terranova were responsible for investigating cases alongside the police. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and developed cases to go to trial. But to take down the mafia, Cesare Terranova would need to understand how the Cosa Nostra worked. He needed to get across the different family clans, learn who its members were, and figure out how far its power extended into Sicilian society. Terranova is energetic and idealistic, and wants to break the stranglehold of organised crime on the island he grew up on. So he investigates the group that most people in Italy only dare whisper about, the Cosa Nostra. For years, Cesare Terranova chases the mafia, crime family bosses like Luciano Leggio, and the smaller players who do most of the dirty work. Prosecuting these people is radical and dangerous. Many cases don't succeed. But despite the setbacks, Terranova does something profoundly important. He's one of the first magistrates to construct a detailed, systemic understanding of how the Sicilian mafia operate, not as isolated criminals, but as an organised network with connections across society. To make a truly big impact, Terranova would need some high-level mafia willing to turn state's witness and reveal all. In Italian, these people are called pentiti. One day, the pentiti will come, but not in Terranova's lifetime. We're now in Rome, and it's 1972. Cesare Terranova wants to try a different approach to stopping the mafia. He runs for a seat in the Italian parliament and wins. It gives him a role in Italy's anti-mafia commission. The next 7 years in Rome offer him a safer life. He later said he wanted to, quote, destroy the halo of untouchability around the Cosa Nostra and those powerful outsiders who protect it. But the anti-mafia commission is a disappointment. Terranova later says the commission was weak and that he had wasted his time on it. So he asks for his old job back as the chief examining magistrate in Palermo, and they're happy to have him. In the middle of 1979, Cesare Terranova returns to Sicily. Now, Judge Terranova might have viewed his years in Rome as a bit of a failure, but the Cosa Nostra saw it differently. They knew he'd made important political connections during his time in the capital. The mafia believed Terranova was returning to Sicily a bigger threat than ever, and they had an organization that could deal with him. The Sicilian Mafia Commission sounds like the name of that federal anti-mafia group in Rome, but that was the Anti-Mafia Commission. The Sicilian Mafia Commission is the mafia's own internal organization that deals with violence and conflict, set up to police squabbles between different mafia clans. But it also decides who gets assassinated. Like if a high-profile civilian causing trouble needs to be taken out. For example, a journalist, a police detective, or a magistrate. The idea behind the Sicilian Mafia Commission is that if one rogue mafia clan assassinates an important public figure, it could have a negative impact on every other family in the Cosa Nostra. So they all needed to be in agreement if there was to be a mafia hit on an outsider. Cesare Terranova is actually the first Italian magistrate to officially acknowledge the existence of the Sicilian Mafia Commission. At the time, no one knew exactly how it operated, but today we know much more. We know that the powerful Corleonese crime family held a seat on the commission. And we know that in 1974, Salvatore Riina addressed the group with a request from his boss, who was currently in prison. The boss wants the commission to approve a hit on the magistrate Cesare Terranova. And this boss, the one who can't be at the meeting in person because he's in jail for murder, it's Luciano Leggio. Remember him? All those years ago, Terranova had made a quip implying that Luciano Leggio might be a bastard. We also know that for various reasons, the assassination doesn't go ahead. But Leggio is patient and knows how to hold a grudge. As soon as Terranova returns to Sicily in the middle of 1979, Luciano Leggio makes his move. The Corleonese family asks the commission to greenlight the assassination again, and this time they want it done right. It's September 25th, 1979, a few months after that meeting of the Sicilian Mafia Commission, and Cesare Terranova is on his way to work. He's 58 years old and has just returned to Sicily and to his old job as a prosecuting magistrate. Terranova is with his bodyguard and friend of 20 years, policeman Lenin Mancuso. Each day, they take an unmarked police escort vehicle to the office. But Judge Terranova likes to drive it himself, so his bodyguard is in the passenger seat. On this morning, 2 cars accelerate towards them and block their vehicle. 3 men jump out and shoot at the car, hitting both Cesare Terranova and his bodyguard. Terranova dies almost instantly. Lenin Mancuso is later pronounced dead in hospital. It was fast and efficient, a classic mafia hit. Luciano Leggio is eventually charged with the murder of magistrate Cesare Terranova. But like many cases against the Cosa Nostra, there just isn't enough evidence to pin it on him. So how do we now know that it was Leggio who ordered the killing? Well, after Terranova's death, his long-held wish comes true. Some important mafia insiders turn state's witness. These informants testify that it was Luciano Leggio who ordered the killing of Judge Terranova. But by then, Luciano Leggio was dead. Other mafia were later also charged with Terranova's murder. In the year 2000, Luciano Leggio's deputy and others at the Mafia Commission meeting were all found guilty of the assassination of Cesare Terranova. It took 2 decades for justice to be served. But the death of Judge Terranova inspired a new generation of magistrates, whose success would come thanks to early pioneers like Cesare Terranova. In our next episode, the case against the Sicilian Mafia ramps up, and the Corleonese crime family starts a war that will inadvertently benefit another brave investigating magistrate. This time, it's Judge Giovanni Falcone, who takes up where Cesare Terranova's life ended at the hands of 3 mafia assassins.